Thank you so much for that introduction. It was so beautifully laid out, and um, appreciate appreciate that recognition, as well as everyone here. I think we all have so much to learn from each other, and also so much to teach to each other. So I am really privileged and thankful to have an opportunity to do some of this sharing with you all. And so to get started, I'm gonna just key up a our material for today, so we can get going here. Well, first of all, let me just state the obvious. Regenerative agriculture is not a new thing. It is an ancestral way of thinking. It is a way of being. It's a way of relating to life in general. It's a way of including ourselves in the natural design, and rather than thinking that we work with nature, understanding that we are nature. That is an indigenous way of thinking. And regenerative processes have existed for as long as the earth has existed. It started, as we know now from scientific data, that the earth was not even livable at the beginning. It was toxic. It was all of those things. But out of all of that came life, and slowly at first, and then those same systems, living systems, regenerated over and over for billions and billions of years, until we arrive to the point where our generation of human beings in the last few, almost 100,000 years or more, were delivered a magnificent design that centered on that same energy that was at the beginning being transformed over and over and over, so that life could exist, become food, be eaten, and then that whatever ate that food being eaten by others, and so on goes the cycles of life. And so in that context, that is what regeneration is about. Regenerative thinking is simply a way of understanding that life on Earth regenerates on a continuous basis, and it does it better when we stop interfering with it. And it is a magnificent design that evolved over millions and millions of years. So at this point,
Reggie,
yes.
We are not seeing your slides.
Okay, let me go back. Hold on a second. There has to be, let me redo it again. Okay, double checking.
We see the screen share.
Yeah. Okay, is that showing this time?
It is showing, yes. There's
Great.
A little bit of a gray box across the top where your mouse is, where the cursor is.
I'm getting the notices to admit and to not admit people. I know it's kind of.
We'll stay on top of that. Yeah, we'll stay on top of that.
Let me see. Yeah, that box, I don't know how to minimize it because it's not giving me that option. Just a second again. Screen sharing. Is this functional enough, or let me see. Sorry about that.
Okay. You can also hide on the left side of that Zoom control. You can go to hide meeting controls from the drop-down menu, and it might pop up again. And if it does, that's okay.
Okay, so yeah, I can't find that. Is this going to work?
Yeah, it'll work.
Okay, all right, great. This is new to me. So I am not too much into theories, although we do develop theories of change and all of that. Everything we have done has always been centered on something practical, something that farmers, consumers, businesses can connect to. So in the context of our work, the poultry center agroforestry system is really the entry point that we chose as a way to create system level changes. And that system level change is centered on engaging the living systems of the earth. And we will be We'll be exploring this in more detail as we go forward. So because we don't want to be too theoretical, I will explain to you our understanding, our collective understanding with all the communities we work with of what indigenous decolonized thinking and operations look like from the perspective of this foundational design that we have developed for poultry. And I'm going to attempt again at moving this. That may be better. Let's see. So the first thing we have to understand in this way of thinking, and again, regenerative agriculture for us is a way of thinking, not a set of practices on the land. Practices on the land are critical, yes, but those practices are really the result of how we think about them and the living systems of the earth. And in our case, we don't engage in production. In order to develop regenerative systems, we got to think beyond the farm and think of ecosystems, for it is only at the ecosystem level that we can regenerate. A farm or a product is simply not regenerative on its own. It doesn't matter how big your farm is. Only ecosystems actually have the capacity to flow energy at a scale that actually creates that regenerative outcome that we all talk about. But how does the farm participate? By understanding three fundamental principles that define energy transformation, and as a result, turns us farmers and practitioners into stewards of energy rather than producers of anything. And so as we think of that, there are three places in the planet where energy is transformed at the largest scale. It's complemented, of course, by thousands, probably millions of other smaller cycles where energy is being transformed. But we have to understand that the first place where energy is transformed at a large scale globally is through the photosynthesis. So if your farm is not optimizing photosynthetic functions, you are missing out. You are stalling that energy transformation potential in your farm. And you're not stewarding energy transformation at the scale that your farm could probably achieve, or an ecosystem, or a country, or the whole world. It doesn't matter because this is a global phenomenon. Animals are central to energy transformation. It is the second biggest place where energy is transformed at a mass scale. The chewing mechanisms and the intestinal tract of animals, it's technically the digestive system of the earth itself. You take a tree or grass and put it into a compost pile, and it will be a year before you see soil. You put it through a cow or forages and sprouted grain through a chicken, and within 72 hours to 2, 3, 4 days, that nutrient that was trapped through photosynthesis to that structure becomes available again to the ecosystem in the form of manure, which immediately goes into feeding microorganisms and continues that next stage of energy transformation, which is in the soil. And so the soil and the health of the soil is the third place where energy is transformed at a mass scale. You interfere with those natural processes at any place on earth, and you're stalling the process of regeneration of your ecosystem. It doesn't matter if you do no-till, organic, and all of those things. If you're compromising any of these three fundamental places where energy is transformed at a large scale, you're actually missing out in terms of the potential capacity of the space. That is a fundamental understanding. It's a way of thinking that allows us to take technology, knowledge, and recodify it so that we can achieve the original design of the earth in whatever it is that we want to harvest as an output, whether it's chickens, eggs, corn, carrots, whatever. As long as we understand these things, we will do better. And we will eventually develop a regenerative set of farming practices out of that. Now, let's apply this thinking to the chicken. And again, is an application of this process, not the end of it. You can take this process and apply it to any livestock, any ecosystem on earth, because fortunately for us, we are not in the business of producing anything. We're in the business of stewarding energy and the transformation processes that had evolved over geological time that deliver us a magnificent design that all is up for the taking, free for everyone. So this is the real life story of an application of this way to an actual livestock option. So here's the animal. Now, why chicken? Because chicken is the one livestock option that delivers those fundamental energy transformation principles I'm talking about, but also delivers the easiest pathway for any of the 700 million farmers or so with under 25 acres in the world to enter a regenerative landscape management option with no restrictions. The chicken as a livestock has the least amount of barriers to entry as long as we design it within that original environment, which is jungle. Chicken is a jungle fowl. So it allows us naturally for the building of that upper infrastructure where photosynthesis is then optimized. The chicken then optimizes the ground level management of that space. And then also exponentially increases the ability of the soil to transform energy as well. So we accomplish all three of those pivoting points of regeneration, which is, again, center of energy transformation and stewardship, rather than regeneration understood from a set of practices on the land. Out of that first layer, we get a significant amount of output. In other words, energy expressions in the form of meat, eggs, fruits, nuts, and so on. But we also get energy that is not necessarily immediately edible by us, but is edible by millions of other organisms that also need food, such as cellulose. All of the biomass coming out of the system is food for other organisms. Now, that unedible energy at the first round then includes, manure, feathers, and so on and so forth, that can now be put through different processes to generate, to move those nutrients, that energy, into new expressions. In our case, we are growing grains, we're growing vegetables, medicinal herbs, perennial crops, and so on. At the end, that energy cycle continues. Some of that energy, some of that grain, byproducts, and so on, discards, and so on, go back to the system and then continue their permanent, never-ending cycle. And every time you turn this, we are not harvesting more than 30 to 40% of the total energy transformed, to the extent that every cycle generates a surplus of energy in the form of unedible to us anyway, expressions of energy that goes back to continue to increase the energy bank in the cycle, so that the region, the ecosystem, is continuously evolving. That's how soils were built, sometimes 7, 12 feet deep over millions of years, which we in less than 150 years have achieved to wash them away and put them in the oceans. That is what we have done with this magnificent design that we have inherited. So again, the chicken is part of an energy-centered process rather than a production system of chickens. And so back to the chicken, it's not that complicated. So first, we get the chickens just like everybody else, a day old. As they grow, we expand their space indoors because they can't be ranging. They are not capable of doing that. After 4 weeks, those chickens are ready to be able to move into the ranging space. But before they get get released into the open space, we are managing that space. But again, back to those perennials. In our case, here in Minnesota, we're talking about hazelnuts and elderberries as the understory, basswood, oaks, sugar maples as the overstory, and then a really large scale ground level management system that we have developed, all the way from increasing the amount of high protein, low fiber forages to a mixes of sprouting grain and all kinds of other agronomics that we have put at the ground level, so that energy is continuously being reharvested, recycled, and the chickens can continue to benefit from them, and the environment, in this case, the perennial crops and the underground infrastructure is fully supported without ever creating excesses that will result on diseases or say the hazelnuts going into vegetative growth because of excess of nitrogen or any imbalance like that. This site that I'm showing you in the picture is now 14 years old, and we still have to see a problem. In fact, all we see is increasing benefits every year. Better forages, faster growing forages, tender shoots, better retermination, higher levels of nutrients being harvested by the sprouting grain and by those forages, larger production of hazelnuts out of the bushes rather than the original production we expected, in excess of 3 times more than we expected, sometimes inside the paddocks as compared to the outside the paddocks, and so on. The other thing is that when we don't have those perennial systems, we can still create that environment by using annual crops. In this case, we have rotated sunflowers and corn in between while the perennial crops develop. Our goal is to let the animals be completely free. And so because of that, and because of the complexity of the life of the animals and their behavior, we rather let the animals move than us trying to move them. Frequently, I have seen some farmers trying to move the shelters instead, but then the chickens are still in confinement, even if you're moving the shelter. And it complicates everything else, complicates feeding, watering. You can't mechanize any of those things. You are locking yourself into a labor-intensive process, which is for us, it was unnecessary because the chickens roam really broadly if you manage the space with the intention of allowing them to roam. And it reduces the amount of work significantly for us. And not only that, but it allows us to harvest most of the manure out of the shelters because they are mostly defecating at night when they are relaxed. And this also means we are never going to overload the space outside, even with the density of birds that we put out into the paddocks, because there is plenty of other organisms harvesting that energy and putting it into usable forms like nuts, plant material, biomass, forages, and so on. And so just so you get an idea of the agronomics, the thinking, and all of that goes behind this. And it is not because we were given a formula. It's simply a way of understanding how natural systems operate, so we can, to the extent that we can, mimic that. Basically, seeing the world from the eyes of the chicken in this case, or from the eyes of a cow, or from the perspective of any other livestock, or from the perspective of a hazelnut. The hazelnut, for example, grows deep roots, like 12 feet deep. It can expand its root systems above, on the first 12 inches of the ground, up to 15 feet in diameter. It requires up to 300 pounds of nitrogen per year, per acre, per season in order to load up. So the chicken also prefers the hazelnut shade over other trees. And partially it's because the hazelnut itself evolved trying to attract birds so that they will defecate on its trunk, so that it would have enough supply of nutrients, and especially nitrogen, which it evolved to need in larger amounts. So its physiognomy is actually developed to attract the animals. So to ignore all of that, it's really irresponsible when we are talking about regenerative thinking. But that thinking, you open up that 95+% of imagination and creativity by thinking from an indigenous perspective, meaning a way of understanding ourselves as part of the living systems instead of those who come and work with those living systems only. And that is really where I think we have added a little bit more of science and benefits to this sector that is emerging now, regenerative. But we also don't develop this only for the chicken. The chicken was critical because if something is regenerative, it's simply better. You don't have to name it regenerative, call it regenerative, label it, or anything. It either is and is great and better for you and for everyone, or it's not. And if it's not, it doesn't matter if you label it regenerative or whatever you want to do with it. It's simply not going to give you the optimal benefits that it can. So in this case, we're looking at scaling up what we do by designing, by incorporating this agronomics and process blueprint into staggered scalability equations. For example, we started with a production unit. You can see those in the bottom of this farm. A production unit for broilers is 1.5 acres divided into 2 paddocks. And just so you know, we started with 4 paddocks, then went to 3, and then eventually the optimization happened at 2 paddocks with 1.5 acres and 1,500 birds per flock. And that we can do 3 flocks here in the Midwest. That's 4,500 birds per production unit. And the place looks beautiful, attractive, smells really nicely. The chickens are always free. And the amount of work that we have to put in it is a tiny portion than if we were to do it differently. So optimizing that at the production unit allowed us then to say, okay, so a production unit isn't going to be enough to make a living out of chickens, but what would do that? And so we create what we call the farm enterprise, which is the aggregation of production units. And then from there, we go to the regional clusters, which means, yes, you can have a farm with many production units, but what about the processing infrastructure, marketing, collective marketing, labeling, collective ownership, governance, decision-making, aggregation of the supply chain, integration of the supply chain, grain production, grain processing? There is so much more that goes along a good agronomical system that we needed to organize at the next level, which is the regional clusters. So the production unit gives us the blueprint for the farm, and the farm gives us the blueprint for regional clusters. And at a regional level, then we can generate enough throughput so that we can support and collectively own, manage, and govern the infrastructure that allows us to succeed as farmers. So back to the farm, chickens are really easy to manage, but so is our cows and sheep. We're incorporating Dorper sheep now because the farms are now bigger than we need for broilers. We don't want more than, say, 8 or 10 production units of broilers per farm for multiple reasons, but most importantly is for risk management, especially disease risks management. So biological controls and so on. The distribution of the bird is totally manageable. You can have these birds completely be chickens without confining them at all, just by the way you manage the landscape. Of course, we're not trying to train you today on how to raise chickens, but just so you know, this has been thought through all the way from the perspective of the chicken, including the tall fences, which are not necessary for the chickens to stay in that space, but rather is necessary to protect them against predators from the ground during the day. And then from the air, once the hazelnuts grow, the canopy grows, it allows us full protection from the air, from animals during the day. As these systems evolved, so everything evolves together, not just the ability of chickens to grow healthier in the same space year after year, but also the harvest from the aggregated canopy, understory and overstory, as I mentioned before. So these are 4-week-old birds, just starting to get a sense of what the outdoors look like. This is it takes 3 days to train them fully. After 3 days, there's not a single bird inside the coops. Remember that there is no feed inside the coop, and especially no water, so that we don't end up with spilled water and large accumulations of ammonia, which are the result of the litter in the ground and the manure getting wet. So watering and feeding is done completely outside, and the way you manage that is the way the chickens roam and just be chickens, right? Same flock, except just about 3 or 4 days from graduation. So same exact idea, except at this point, they are fully grown birds. They have been doing this every single morning. They go in almost at 100% a night on their own. There's very little intervention on our part. We don't have to do this. Again, we don't need to be moving buildings for the birds to have all of the roaming space they need. We also don't want them concentrated in a single spot. So this way they get to fertilize and maintain all of the fields and get to give us incredible amounts of energy that are then moved throughout the rest of the farm. In this case, we do layering of manure and organic matter so that we can achieve beautiful gardens and also larger scale landscape management, mixing this at a 1-to-2 ratio with organic matter, wood chips, especially, and other farm byproducts. Hazelnut production we have been documented it now for 6 years. One of these days, if you want to participate in our trainings, we'll give you all the data on how incredibly different the production of hazelnuts with the presence of chickens has been in terms of productivity and efficiency of those trees to be able to optimize their genetic potential. Also, the harvesting of biomass that is critical for all of the gardening. This specific plot we applied this mix at about 12 inches in depth for the garden. 8 years later, we're still producing top quality vegetables without any new intervention, nutritionally speaking. It's a slow release system that gives year after year after year. Of course, some of this material is being incorporated as energy every year, but it's only the stuff that is now growing in the space itself. Weed control, we went down to almost no weeds control. There's still some weeds that come up, but the labor that it took, to manage the weeds compared to places that were not managed this way is probably 25% or less than the amount of labor that we had to put into this space versus the other space. Not that the weeds were growing, it's just so much easier to handle them. And the plants grow much more robust, so it gives them much more competitive advantages. And the mulch also keeps a lot of that pressure down. So it's not just about the chickens. This is about energy transformation into multiple expressions, ethnic foods like black beans, garlic, squash, supporting the flowering plants and the ecosystem so that bees can develop the perennial crops, the extra cash. Over the last 2 years, we have generated the same net income from hazelnuts than we do from the chickens in the same exact space. Okay, so now you take this farm design and then you move it into regions of producers of eggs under the same design and regions of producers of broilers. Then you get enough throughput so that we can start acquiring poultry processing facilities, egg processing facilities, and then establishing whether it's cooperatives or other kinds of collective ownership. And also remember that there is byproducts that other livestock may want to consume. So the byproducts of the chicken, we don't want to dry and grind and put them back into the chicken's feed system, because you would end up, instead of mad cows, we have mad chickens instead of happy chickens. So this way we can incorporate fish production, because it's a completely separate species that in nature, species eat each other across species, but not within the same species, not all of the species anyway. Chickens are known to be cannibals, and they probably would do better eating each other, but we still don't want to practice that just as a matter of general principle. And so also, because we have this integrated production system, we can bring all of the byproducts, mix them up, dry them up, put them back into the feed supply, because once the chicken byproducts, say giblets and tripes and all of that, was eaten by the fish, then it is suspended into the fish, into the water in the fish in the form of ammonia, and then that can be used as fertigation to bring it out into the fields, where we may get other byproducts, which then mix with the grains and the other byproducts, including the byproducts from the fish processing, allows us to generate more of those, more input that can be put back into the feed system, because it's now far removed cycle-wise from the direct feeding it back to the chicken kind of system that a lot of the feed companies have been doing since we learned about the mad cows issue way back, because they were grinding cows and feeding them back to them. So aggregating these products requires that we think beyond just the farm and beyond just aggregating farm after farm to build co-ops, but also think of value-added processing. We are now scaling up garlic production and other vegetables that are actually selected strategically so that we can produce, so we can develop supply chain that is not just hanging all over the place with hundreds of different products, but rather so we can build a regenerative industry, not just think of farms as the ultimate goal. Transportation, all kinds of other services, warehousing, technical services, capital management, medicinal herbs, non-timber forest products, timber forest products, vegetables, grain at a scale, milling facilities. Now we're talking about real circular economies and actual rural economic development, all of it incorporated within a systematic design so that we can reclaim ownership, governance, and especially the wealth creation capacity of regenerative systems and the infrastructure that allows us to decide where that wealth goes instead of it continuing to be extracted. Now, we haven't talked, remember, I haven't said much about decolonization. I am showing you what decolonization looks like. Decolonization meaning the opposite of systems that extract the value from the natural systems and the value of our labor, our efforts, our dedication to the land, and to stewarding energy transformation. That generates a lot of wealth. In fact, generates more wealth than extractive systems. The difference is that extractive colonizing systems are efficient at extraction and at making a few very, very rich and powerful. Decolonized systems make communities powerful and wealthy. That is the difference between colonizing and decolonizing. And if we indigenize the way we think, meaning we understand our role within the living systems and act accordingly, engineer accordingly, and design accordingly, then we achieve decolonized, indigenized outcomes. And that is at the end what delivers regeneration, not a few practices on the land. It's really intellectually insulting to reduce such a magnificent system into a couple of things that people are doing and then appropriating indigenous knowledge and then going and putting brands and then claiming it in the marketplace as if somehow they invented sugar water. So just say. Now, enterprise sector aggregation is critical because we are at the end talking about economies of scale. We live in a world where we have to operate at scale, but we don't have to compromise the foundational principles and the integrity of regenerative design in indigenous ways in order to achieve economies of the scale. It is completely doable if we hold the integrity of ownership, control, and governance, and we build that infrastructure so we can do so. Now, as a result of all of this, we have been developing an ecosystem of businesses. Regen Poultry is one of them. My family farm, Zapatero Farm is another one. This is how we took a piece of land and applied this process to. Corn on corn on corn for many years with a few rotations into soybeans. This is the 75 acres, 28 of them are already forest, which we're managing, 26.5 actually. Managed as forest. We're not going to change that. In fact, we're going to improve on that and improve on the rest of the land. This is in the fall, our land to the right, the conventional field to the left, and the forest on the bottom. We built water retention systems and also started breaking the tiles where it was okay based on the hydrology of the land, creating reservoirs so we hold that water, and then planting nursing crops so we could restore that original first step, which is capture as much carbon and put it in the soil, feed the soil again. We didn't even harvest this barley. We tilled it under because we thought it was too toxic because of the levels of toxicity on that soil. This is what that land is going to look like eventually, where the chickens will roam. This is what the chickens will do. They will manage this space. And as a result of that, this farm's blueprint, as far as business planning is concerned, so you get a picture of different angles of how this is done. We are looking at 40 acres of sow or intensive management, 6 broiler units, production units at 1.5 acres each, 8,000 hazelnuts. We already planted those. Would deliver us around 6,000 pounds of clean nuts eventually when they produce at 3 to 4 years after we plant them. We are selling a lot of these products already, so that is an estimated income that we can generate based on the current prices we are selling these products at. Again, not as a farm, but as a collective. All the marketing and distribution is done collectively. We don't do direct sales and things like that. Instead, we try to capture the value up the supply chain collectively so that the wealth still returns to us.
6,000 pounds of hazelnuts?
Pounds, yes. Based on our current data. from the last 6 years or so of production in the paddocks. 10 acres of elderberries, 20 acres of silvopasture with 150 Dorper sheep, 1 egg laying unit. We're still not sure if we're going to deploy that at this point because we are thinking of a different, better strategy for this one. 26 acres of forest and agritourism. So basically, this farm, as designed right now, can generate $641,000 farm gate value at 40 acres of intensive management, and the rest of it, 26 of forest. Gross income per acre, about $16,000, 2 full-time jobs and 6 part-time. Just to give you a quick overview of economic and social impact, I think by now you got a good picture of what the ecological impact is. It's incredible and is really rewarding to be documented with the support of 4 renowned scientists in Minnesota, the ecological blueprint, and taking the data about this. So whether it's the elimination of synthetic inputs, the elimination of runoff, the elimination of tillage, the increased retention of water, the decontamination of it, the increase of material organic matter as a foundation of the energy transformation capacity of the soil, and as a foundation of that energy capture, and on and on and on it goes. It's really a never-ending story. It's never fixed. It's continuously improving, and that's what we want. We also built a whole ecosystem of partners and so on. Blue Nest, for example, on your left, if you put that link on the chat, so you can, if you want to buy our chicken anywhere in the country, Blue Nest distributes it now. We will be bringing it to grocery stores as well as we go forward. We labeled it. Tree Range is a separate company. Tree Range Farms is aggregation, contracting, and so on. We're working with Thunder Valley down in the Pine Ridge Reservation to deploy a separate system there of eggs. We have chefs, communities, all of these farms. The idea is to build an ecosystem rather than a farm. Farms are part of that ecosystem, but the ecosystem is what allows us, the ecosystem of enterprises and businesses, is what allows us to achieve regional scale impact, economies of scale, and all of that without compromising the foundation of regenerative thinking and ways of being that identifies us as indigenous peoples. We recently purchased a processing facility out of Stacyville, Iowa. And so we are mapping out that region and working with farmers in that region. Albert Lee became our partner, the Economic Development Authority and the state of Minnesota. So we are now thinking about an industrial development park to build this at a new scale. This is only possible because, again, we are working collectively. As a farm, we could never achieve this, no matter how big our farm may have been. And as farmers, we succeed because we build the ecosystem, and now we're building the collective governance so that we can, again, think about what does it mean, what do colonizing systems do? They come and discover these things that always existed. They come and they name these discoveries. That's how regenerative was named regenerative, because some mostly white people discovered it, and now they named it, just the same as other folks have named the lands and cultures. Then they come and legally appropriate and then expropriate it from the original peoples. They standardize and scale ownership and control systems, whether it's through policies, corporations, legislation, whether it's through brands and through standards that then only apply to certain brands, and so on. And then they build systems to keep anybody else who's doing this work legitimately from interfering with that space, and they use money and power and so on to control that as a way of continuing to colonize. Decolonizing means something else. This is really the indigenous process. It's about rediscovering the systems that have existed among us forever, renaming them and reclaiming them and securing them as part of community ownership, commons, not as part of any individual corporate ownership. We need to rebuild that governance and protection systems. That's what I showed you in the ecosystem building. And then standardize these processes so we can do this at a large scale in more parts of the world in a systemic way. That's how we decolonize. That's how we expand and organize into new systems that also will deliver regeneration at the ecosystem level. Now, it's important to understand a few things for ourselves to take home in order to, in terms of decolonizing and indigenizing. It is an individual responsibility as well as a collective responsibility to think of ourselves, if we farm, let's not be producers anymore. Let's be stewards of energy transformation. That is really where our ultimate goal needs to be, and where our dignity will be restored. Engage with money. If you do that, be an extractor no more. Be extractor of wealth no more. Build collective wealth with us. Be a partner and ally. We can all do better as a result. Wealth can be built, and we can all have more of it. It's just a few shouldn't have more at the expense of the rest of us. Work for justice and equality, but be a savior no more. Be an insurgent in your own colonized world. And I mean an intellectual insurgent. Change the way we think. Buy food, but be a consumer no more. Be a steward of your body, your mind, and your spirit. And then it will affect directly who you buy food from. How are you willing to pay so those folks also make a living and have dignity as they deliver this nourishment to your body, to your mind, and to your spirit? Eating is a spiritual act. It's not a stuffing act. That is so critical for us to indigenize our ways and start decolonizing the infrastructure that continues to extract our collective resources and nature's itself. So I hope we can reconcile with this incredible opportunity we have in front of us, and that we really pursue this final destination of developing regenerative indigenous systems that can return not only the cycles of the earth that we have so severely destructive to the point that our own existence is actually being threatened by our own hand, but also to restore our dignity as human beings. That is, at the end, a regenerative destination. It's not about farm practices, and it's not about what we are being sold primarily by the whitewashing nonprofit infrastructure and corporate infrastructure that have rushed into discovering and colonizing this space. Let's meditate on that. Let's not make those mistakes, and let's speak the truth so that hopefully we can capitalize on the larger and ultimate benefit and promise of true regenerative thinking. It is regenerative because it is regenerative, not because we call it. It either regenerates or it doesn't. Whether you call it or not regenerative is not the point. The point is it? That's, my friends, I hope we can start moving this conversation forward and hopefully exciting our neurons here. And I'm gonna go back into the chat, or Brooke,
Yeah,
you already
check it out. It's exploding with thank yous and write-ons, and there was an explosion of hearts and hand clapping. I mean, I think everyone's really excited with these messages you're sharing with us today. So thank you, Reggie. You've shared just so much for us to consider, and I'm really excited to get to the Q&A. We have a whole long list of questions. So where do we start, Reggie? I have a whole list of questions. There's a huge list from other folks. I think, let's see. Let's get into some of the details of chickens specifically first. There are a lot of those questions right at the beginning. I guess really nuts and bolts questions. How do you feel about Cornish cross broilers in the system, or do you recommend heritage breeds only? What is your thinking on breed selection?
Totally important. If you think of, say, a flat line, and then think of one extreme being broilers, industrial Cornish broilers, the other extreme being completely heritage breeds, and then this is 0, and this is or this is 9 o'clock and this is 3 p.m. Maybe what we want to be at is around noon to 1 p.m. in terms of breeds. The heritage breeds are incredibly efficient, but they are not very marketable. The Cornish broiler is incredibly inefficient, but it is very marketable, but it's only efficient at beefing up. And so you end up with inefficiencies in terms of how much you can incorporate, because they don't roam, they are technically no longer being able to express the full genetic capacity that animals were evolved with. And so we are looking for something that is still marketable, but ranges. And you saw those chickens take leaps That's 65 days into it. The Cornish broilers can't do that. So they are simply not fit for regenerative systems, period.
Okay. And then remind us how many broilers are in one production unit, and how many, like, what is their feed supply in that one unit?
Yep, so one broiler unit, one production unit is 1.5 acres divided into 2 paddocks. Those paddocks are planted and all of that and managed. As I said, we put 1,500 broilers per flock. We start with more than that, so we end with 1,500. The density increases. In the first year, you may want to put less because normally the soil is not yet capable of reacting and growing the forages and all, and the feeds and so on at the scale that you need. But 2-3 years later, full production units are at 1,500 chickens. We feed them a traditional organic certified feed, as well as mixes of grains that are sprouted in the fields. The new units are being installed with irrigation so that we can sprout grains at a really large scale continuously. That allows us to reduce the amount of ground up feed. And we haven't yet optimized that, but we have so far been able to reduce down to 30%, 25, 30% of the feed by increasing the sprouting grains and the forages. We are bringing in new forages as well that are higher in protein and lower in fiber. And that's how it goes. I can't tell you all of the details. It takes 40 hours of training for every farmer to graduate from this, but that's basically the framework.
Great. So there were a lot of questions about how are you protecting the flocks from predators in this model. Everyone's noting how many animals they're losing to predators. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I know folks will be excited.
Yeah, and by the way, we don't lose animals to predators almost ever. The only animals we have lost was to feral cats that were released by neighbors, and then they became wild, and by dogs that people from the cities sometimes come and park their cars and let their dogs loose. So at the beginning, we didn't put high fences because, well, we're out here ourselves, and during the daytime, all the ground level predators don't come out. They come out at night. And so we don't worry about them during the day. And we had to protect not against actual natural predators, but domesticated predators that are no longer capable of recognizing their role in nature. The other thing is that aerial predators, they need very specific conditions. So we basically saw the field and the chicken from the eye of an eagle or a hawk. And what does the hawk and the eagle need in order to take a chicken? And then we built the canopy and then tested it over and over until we got to this density, where at that density, and then certain organization of that completely eliminates the conditions. And hawks and aerial predators are incredibly smart. They won't land themselves into a situation where their own survival is compromised. And that's exactly what we did. And then, so the first couple of years, we lost a few chickens to predators, and then we never lost a chicken again. Once in a while, there are incidents, but it's not something we worry about. Our mortality rate is only under 5%, and there are flocks where only 1% is lost. That is the critical indicator of the efficiency and the magnificence of the design. Somebody wrote there 1,500 per acre. No, it's 1,500 chickens per flock. Each production unit is 1.5 acres divided into 2 paddocks, 0.75 acres per paddock. That's 20 square foot per paddock per chicken, or 40 square feet in total between the 2 paddocks, just to be clear.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, let me see. There's another group of questions really around, people were remarking on the hazelnut crop and how it's both like this clear keystone part of the whole system, but really remarking on, well, asking questions about the varieties you're choosing and where you're sourcing them from, what you're finding works best in this system in your region.
Yes, so hazelnuts are really a worldwide crop. It's native to, together with elderberries, they are native to multiple ecologies around the world. There's the Corylus cornuta, there's the Corylus americana, and so on. Now, we use hybrids. They have been developed by the University of Minnesota and growers in our region for over 3-4 decades. Our sources come out of forest agriculture enterprises. they are the ones who have supplied the best so far in the last 13 years. Their breeds, their hybrids are the ones that we have been using the most and achieving the best results with. There's a lot going on in there. If you want a direct source, Forest Ag Enterprises out of Wisconsin. Karen Vanek, they're incredibly good partner, and they can supply anywhere in the country. We can further elaborate on that if you reach out to us in terms of the specific varieties we are picking. We at this point are also setting up our own nurseries because those varieties, we can reproduce them, and that's central to decolonizing, is not to plant those breeds that are being appropriated by universities and companies so that we are not paying royalties to those who actually are not necessarily contributing to our communities, but rather extracting more wealth.
Wonderful. And thinking about, you know, hazelnuts work here in Kentucky, but we have a lot of folks on the call who are a little further south and west. What about pecans or other, have you explored other nut trees?
Yes, in the rainforest, in fact, we are using multiple species. We have 15 species in the northern rainforest. 3 of them are nuts. The rest of them are other species, including understories. Also here in the US, we know in general, this we have verified, nut species, all of them do incredibly well with the chickens. Fruit species, not so much. The broilers and the apples and prunes, for example, don't go together very well. They do better with egg layers, but you have to have the egg layers roaming in larger space. We doubled the space for egg layers in this specific region where we tested the system. We quadrupled the space in higher, drier regions, say in Mexico, where the vegetation doesn't regenerate as fast as it does here in the Midwest or in the northern rainforest. So again, the system is designed to be completely adaptable to all of these different ecologies. And we had the advantage that we have partners all across Mexico, Guatemala, British Columbia, and here in the US. So we tested different theories on how the process can be adapted. So the species, we choose hazelnuts and elderberries because they are native to almost 2/3, if not the whole country, continental US, except for the desert areas. I think everywhere else, hazelnuts can be found wild. Different breeds, different varieties, but it's still there. And then we can they are indicators that allows us to decide on other varieties that we can bring in of the same plant blueprint. But then there's multiple species that do really well with the poultry, especially if they are nut species, oaks, chestnuts, Brazil nuts, Ramon trees in northern Guatemala, and so on.
Yeah. Okay, we're 1 minute over time, but I have 2 questions left for you. Is that okay? Does that work? I mean, we have a dozen questions, but I'm going to go for 2.
Good with me.
Okay. So thinking about the collective, right, and all the partners and stakeholders in this. So much of this work, of the decolonizing work, is personal work and relationship building, right, and doing it together. Can you talk to us a little bit about how do you create that collective mindset, right, as a group with these partners where you're marketing together, right, as a collective? Can you talk a little bit both about the mechanisms in place to do that, but maybe also the bigger heart lift work of that?
Yeah, there are ancestral blueprints that we are using. And I did a presentation specifically on indigenization of governance and all of that, which is a separate, completely different keynote if you ever want that one. And in that, we established the processes by which you use a perimeter in the outside of a big circle. There is see the drum behind me? That drum is actually drawn in the same exact ancestral blueprint, where the perimeter, if you take that outside perimeter, it will have all of the producers, say, for poultry. But it could be one sector for poultry, one sector for grass-fed beef, one sector for chickens, for pigs, and so on. It could be, and it can adapt to almost any decolonization process. In the case of poultry, we take all the poultry producers and they sit on the outside of the circle. That circle could be one of those little circles. But if we pull out, we would say the larger circle, and then inside that, say, regions organized into councils. And then those regions organized into councils elect representatives that then become the Regenerative Poultry Council. And that we are organizing on March 10th and 11th out of Albert Lea, Minnesota. We will organize the first Regenerative Poultry Council of America. Again, following completely decolonized processes rather than just a nonprofit coming up with, or a company coming up with and saying, okay, here's the standard for poultry. No, no, no. This is going to be the governing structure for our standard. And then the collective marketing and stuff is not about co-ops or anything like that. Honestly, we can do a lot of collective work without a lot of those organizational systems, as long as we understand that individually as farmers, we're really nobody. We're only as good as the size of the collective work we can do. When we understand that, it creates a common mindset. Why? Because our survival depends on it. And when we go to those more fundamental reasons we get motivated about something, then we do things with a level of energy that we won't do unless we understand those fundamental things. And farmers, we are staunchly independent and we are individualistic. And so, yes, it takes quite a lot of decolonizing of ourselves in order to understand that alone, we are simply little dots waiting there to be erased by some big company that comes over or new policy that takes over or whatever. And so collective organizing is central to regenerative ways. And so this collective way we are designing is not new. This is the way communities for tens of thousands of years have operated large scale landscape, just like the whole continental US was managed in a similar way. Back in Guatemala, the whole country was managed that way. And so, and those same systems are the reason there's over 1,000 communities in Guatemala that survived 500 years of brutal colonization and genocide and still there because those are better systems, period. That's what we are trying to bring back so that we can reclaim our space and our dignity as people, as farmers, and as communities. When we understand that and we can decolonize the way we think about things and thinking that we have to own and control everything for it to work, instead of looking at it just from that individualistic, guttural perspective, when we understand that, then we understand the power of the collective, and then we reclaim the commons, and those kinds of commons, there is no tragedy in it, only success and only well-being.
Fantastic. So if we were to have enough interest here in Kentucky, would you come on back down and do a regional training for us?
Listen, if you folks out there are willing to do what it takes to get ourselves into the next level of how we actually succeed as communities, I'll go anytime for as long as you need and support your process of exploration and decolonization. That's not something I do for you. That's something you do. But if you need me there in order to get the encouragement and maybe, if you will, the clarity of thought and methodology and all of that, happy to do that. Yes.
Fantastic. So that is just a reminder to all of you on the call who are interested, please do fill out the survey and share your interest in this possibility with us. And, you know, we'll continue stewarding this conversation with you all and with Reggie and see what the possibilities here are in Kentucky. So thank you. I see a lot of comments coming through on that. So thank you.
Looks like you got an organizing partner already.
I know, it's true. And we love that. That's how so much happens here in Kentucky. It's fantastic. So Reggie, thank you so much for joining us today. We're incredibly grateful for the work you do and the work your team does and has been doing, and for all the inspiration you shared with us here. So to learn more, please, everyone on the call, consider checking out Reggie's book, In the Shadow of the Green Man, My Journey from Poverty and Hunger to Food Security and Hope. It's on our Oak Team reading list, actually, for this next. We do a monthly book club, and that's what we're going to get to in the spring. So we're so excited. And also just, you know, follow up with us or with Reggie if you have any questions. We'll have his slides and the recording up to later, probably early next week, and you can share that. So, you know, Reggie, do you have any parting words with us for us?
Let's get out from under. Let's do it together.
Let's do it, everyone. Reggie, we're just grateful. Best wishes to you. And thanks everyone for being on the call today. Take care.
You too.